Mary, if you're able to share the presentation, that would be great. And hi, everyone. We're going to get started in just a moment. I'm going to welcome you to this webinar in Remington Woods. And just give us a moment or two for people to hop on. And I think you can just press present up in the right corner there, Mary. Yeah. There we go. Perfect. All right. Thank you. I want to welcome you. My name is Sam Dynowski. I'm the State Director for Sierra Club Connecticut. I want to start by thanking the Sustainable Fairfield Task Force for organizing this series of virtual Earth Week webinars. They have done 2 every day this week, and they're up on their website and YouTube for reviewing. It's a really wonderful series of events to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Earth Week. And special thanks to Mary Hogue, who organized and is behind the scenes here, doing all the technical work for today's meeting, making sure that everything goes smoothly. So thank you, Mary. And thank you all for joining this session or for watching it afterwards on Remington Woods, an urban forest at risk. I'd like to just run through a little bit of housekeeping about how we'll run the webinar before we dig in. Anyone who's joined us here live, you are on mute. But at the bottom of your screen, if you toggle over, you have a chat box. There's a there, and you can click on the chat box and say hi to everyone. I encourage you to introduce yourself and to say hello and to thank Mary for all the work she's done. There's also a Q&A box, and at the end of the presentation, we will take questions and answer them. You can, I would hold questions until you get to the end and then type them in, and we'll take them from there. And then lastly, this session is being recorded. It's going to show up on YouTube, so I just want folks to know that. So let's do some introductions. Again, I'm Sam Dynowski from Sierra Club. And let's go around to our presenters. How about Eric?
Hi, everyone. Eric Hammerling. I'm the Executive Director of the Connecticut Forest and Park Association. Big fan of Earth Day, and as one of our panelists also knows, huge fan of Arbor Day. So great to be with you.
Amy.
Hi, everybody. I'm Amy Paterson, and I'm the Executive Director of the Connecticut Land Conservation Council, or CLCC. And we're the statewide umbrella organization for Connecticut's land conservation community, working most predominantly with the state's 130 plus land trusts, which, by the way, little factoid, 3rd most in the country. So happy to be here. Thanks.
Thanks, Amy. Ashley.
Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is Ashley Stewart. I'm a Connecticut resident and a Yale grad student. I'm looking forward to being a part of the conversation.
Ashley and Joe.
Good afternoon, everybody. Joe Gresco. I am the for the city of Bridgeport Green Initiatives Coordinator, and I'm also a state representative for the town of Stratford.
Great. So those are our presenters for today. And Mary, if you can advance to the next slide. A little bit on what the agenda looks like for this webinar. We're going to talk about urban forests, about land conservation and how it's done, and then dig into information on Remington Woods, about the woods and about its current status, and talk about equity, community access, and stewardship when it comes to lands such as this, and then we'll move to Q&A. Next slide, please, Mary. And so I'll turn to Eric to talk about the value of urban forests. Go ahead, Eric.
Thank you, Sam. as you can see on this slide, there are an awful lot of benefits of trees to people. And when you're talking about urban areas like Bridgeport, healthy trees in urban areas provide many benefits to many people. And in fact, if we think about urban areas in Connecticut, that's most of Connecticut. About 88% of our state population lives in urban areas. And that is on about 37, about a third of the land area of Connecticut. So when you're talking about the number of people who are in close proximity to trees and the potential benefits of protecting a place like Remington Woods, or I should say the potential for loss if we don't protect an urban forest like Remington Woods, is magnified. So I'm going to go through a few of the amazing benefits of urban trees and forests that hopefully will be somewhat familiar to you. And we'll have an opportunity to talk about other issues. I'm very glad that Ashley is able to join us to talk about some of the equity issues associated with where our trees tend to be as well, and who is getting the majority of the benefits versus not realizing those same benefits across our state and urban areas. Okay, so trees, not surprisingly, have a lot of physical characteristics that provide benefits. They provide shade. And what's important about providing shade? Well, shade reduces heat-related health issues, right? You don't want to overheat, so it's nice to have shade. It also reduces the costs associated with air conditioning, for example. So there are a lot of important things about having shade. Trees grow, and as they do, they take on carbon. And the more carbon that is held in trees, the less carbon we have in the atmosphere. And obviously, with all of the concern about climate change, having trees be able to absorb as much carbon and store as much carbon as possible is a huge benefit to people and to our earth. Trees absorb water and stabilize soils. And that is really significant because that helps to reduce flooding and erosion issues, which can result in a lot of damage to property and people and structures if trees are not there to help to absorb water and stabilize soils. Trees breathe through photosynthesis and trap pollutants, and to have the ability to both create more oxygen for us and also keep fine particulates out of the air, that helps us have cleaner air, and it reduces issues associated with asthma. Now, of course, there are exceptions to all of the things that I'm talking about here. The emphasis is on healthy trees and the right trees. You can potentially plant trees or have trees in certain areas that will create issues like having allergies or too much pollen. But those issues aside, overall, healthy trees are providing all of these benefits to people. Trees are beautiful, and they increase property values. So if you have a home or live in an apartment with trees nearby, that makes it that much more of a valuable place to be. At the same time, it also increases business foot traffic. If you have a business and there are trees in the area, there is a much higher likelihood that people will be walking through versus driving through. And of course, that leads to additional business stops. And of course, with a place like Remington Woods and trees being beautiful, that's a way to attract tourism and visitors to a place. Obviously, a lot of benefits to local neighborhoods, but it also helps the economy when other people come to visit. Trees have an amazing ability to help people relax and improve mental and physical health. Trees have been, and there are a number of studies that talk about trees reducing blood pressure, for example. If you have high blood pressure issues, being near trees helps to reduce your blood pressure. There have been studies showing reductions in crime. There have been studies showing improvements in being able to learn. So in particular with children with attention deficit disorders, being in natural areas with trees can help them to better focus and learn. There have been studies that help increase the healing time for people who may have been sick. Just to be in a hospital room that looks out on trees versus one that doesn't actually shortens the time that you would spend in a hospital. Of course, who wants to spend time in a hospital? So there are all those ways that trees benefit your health. Of course, trees also provide habitats for wildlife, and there are lots of critters that like living in trees, both live trees and dead trees, by the way. But there's huge wildlife populations that either are resident or move through urban areas, and trees are an essential part of them being healthy and there for everyone to enjoy. Trees provide jobs. Let's not forget that there are a lot of jobs associated with planting, caring for, studying, managing trees, even cleaning up trees after storms and things like that. All of those are jobs that are important these days. To have economies that are benefiting from having trees is a really essential reason why they need to be protected. And then lastly, urban forests like Remington Woods provide places for people to recreate on trails, to get away from the city and work-related stresses, places to learn about nature, and again, to improve your mental and physical health. So if you're thinking about the benefits of urban areas with trees versus urban areas without trees, there are enormous benefits that we all can realize from having these areas both there and protected. So that's why I'm excited to be a part of this conversation today in thinking about protection of Remington Woods. And with that, I think we should go to the next slide and turn things over to Amy Paterson, who can talk about what it takes to actually protect land and places like Remington Woods.
Thanks, Eric. Thinking about all the things that you say, I don't think it's been any clearer. It's ever been more clear to people than right now in the situation that we're all in, living with this pandemic, how important having nature, how important it is to have access to the outdoors. So those human benefits are really underscored right now. So next slide. And I'm going to give you a very quick run through of land conservation in Connecticut, as well as, again, some of the nuts and bolts of putting a land conservation deal together. This is obviously just a primer. There is so much involved, but at the end of the day, where there's a will, there's a way. And I've done a lot of land deals over all these years. And again, I have found that when there's a willing buyer and a willing seller and a desire to conserve land, those deals will happen. So in Connecticut, we have a state goal to protect 21% of the state's land area. That goal is set forth in our Connecticut general statutes. That number is approximately 673,000 acres. Of that 21%, 10% is to be conserved by the state of Connecticut and 11% to partners. And those partners consist of municipalities, consist of land trusts or other conservation organizations, as well as water companies. And that is, again, all set forth in our statute. The target year to conserve 21%, and that statute, by the way, was put in place in 1998. The target year to reach that 21% is 2023. And that is a goal that was put forth in our state green plan, which is the open space, comprehensive open space strategy. It's a policy document, it's not a statute. And if you want the most up-to-date status on where we are at, I would suggest you go to the Connecticut Council on Environmental Quality. They just put out their 2019 annual report on the state of the environment, and they have a very nice comprehensive section or two on land in there. But just to break that out for you a little bit, of the 21%, we're about 75% of the way there, which doesn't sound too bad actually, until you start to get down into the weeds and you figure out how much is actually needed per year to reach that goal. And again, CEQ does a nice job of this, but in order to reach the goal of 21% of the land conserved within the next 4 years, the state of Connecticut would need to conserve approximately 15,000 acres a year. And the others, those partners that I had enumerated, would have to conserve even more, approximately 20,000 acres collectively a year to reach their 11% of the 21%. So to put that in perspective, 15,000 per year for the state over the next 4 years. Well, in 2019, the state closed on land deals that conserved approximately 788 acres. And in 2019, and we don't have comprehensive data on this collectively what the partners have done, but just to put it in perspective, just under the state's open space grant program, awards were given for land trusts and partners to conserve approximately 2,400 acres. So it is now universally agreed upon that we will not meet our goal of conserving the 21% by the year 2023. Of course, that doesn't stop us from seeking to achieve that goal, and that's what all of the groups that I have just enumerated, as well as the state of Connecticut, seek to do every single day. Those partners, as I said, are towns, land trusts, and water companies, as well as the state of Connecticut. So I tell you this not only to underscore the importance of the state of Connecticut and municipalities, as well as all of us, to continue to invest in land conservation so that we can meet our state goals. But I also tell you this to underscore the importance of conserving a property like Remington Woods, which is a large piece of property, 400 contiguous acres of land in an area that doesn't have that kind of property. So there are so many reasons, both locally and statewide, to seek to conserve Remington Woods. And I think putting it in the context of where we're at in meeting our 21% goal is one of them. So next slide. So that's kind of the overview of where we're at in Connecticut with meeting our land conservation goals. We have a lot of work, but there is a lot of effort out there to get that done. So how do we put a land conservation transaction together? Again, there is no one size that fits all. I've seen deals that involve all of the partners that I have referenced. So from the local to this federal level, groups are all getting involved to conserve a piece of land. So how do we save land? There are two main strategies to conserve a piece of land. One would be a fee simple transfer. And that is simply when the owner of the property transfers their title or their full ownership interest in the property to someone else. In the case of land conservation, that would be, again, one of those partners. The landowner would no longer have any interest in the property, and they could wash their hands of it and move on. The other way to do that, or to conserve land, would be through something called a conservation easement. And in that case, the landowner still owns their title to the property. They're still the landowner, but what they have done is they have agreed to, voluntarily, agree to give up their right to develop the property. And that is a conservation easement in its most simple form. And that is, again, they say, we're not going to develop the property, and we are going to agree to that in writing. And that agreement is between the landowner and one of those partners that I referenced. And that would give that partner the right to enforce the terms of that easement, that agreement, so that the landowner would be held to their promise not to develop the property and do other things that might undermine the conservation values that are being sought to be protected. So a conservation easement, again, it's a written document. It is enabled by our statutes, the Connecticut General Statutes, and that number is 47-42A, if you're interested in taking a look. And they are perpetual in nature. That means they last forever. And they are recorded, most of them and they are recorded on the land records, and they run with the title to the land, so that when that landowner decides to sell the property, that conservation easement would still be in place, and the next landowner that takes title would be subject to the same terms and conditions as the landowner that initially agreed to them to begin with. And conservation easements are a very popular way to conserve land. They give landowners the right to still own the land and manage the land, but they have to do that subject to this agreement that gives the landowner the peace of mind to know that when they sell that property or it's conveyed to others, their conservation goals will still be protected. And land trusts and the other holders of those conservation easements are obliged to monitor those properties to make sure that the landowner is living up to those conditions in the easement and have the right to enforce those terms. So it's a really popular tool, and it's one that we look to all the time to help make sure that we are trying to meet our land conservation goals in the state. How do we pay for, or how are these deals done? By way of consideration. So when the landowner provides the easement or grants the easement or conveys title, what kind of consideration do they get in addition to the peace of mind to know that their land is conserved? Well, they can be compensated just like in any other real estate transaction. They can sell it. They can sell the land for its full fair market value. They can also donate the land, and when a landowner donates land, there are certain tax benefits that they might receive. And they can do something in between called a bargain sale, which means they're selling the land, but they're selling it at a price that's less than the fair market value. And then they get some tax benefit for the donation of the part of that sale that is less than the fair market value that they have received. So there are different ways to structure a land conservation deal, both in terms of the interest that's being conveyed, as well as the consideration that's being received by the landowner. And so if it is a deal that has been undertaken through a purchase and there's money involved, well, what are the sources of funding for land conservation transactions? Well, not surprisingly, funding can run from the most local level right up to the federal government. Local sources of funding include bonding, and some towns or cities bond for a specific property purchase, others bond generally so that they have money in their open space fund. For years, we have been trying to get a buyer's conveyance fee program enabled by the state of Connecticut that would give towns the option to set up yet another funding source, another tool for them for their local open space purchases. And that's something certainly we could talk about another time, but please contact me if you want more info on that. The state of Connecticut has two main funding sources. One is for DEEP, the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, so that they can purchase land, and that's the Rec and Natural Heritage Trust program. And the other most popular program for us is the Open Space and Watershed Land Acquisition Grant Program, which is the partners' source of funding. So the land trusts and other conservation organizations, municipalities and water companies look to that matching grant fund every year so that they will have some money so that they can purchase land from willing landowners. And finally, there are a number of programs at the federal level and federal partnering agencies that can be looked into when putting together a land conservation deal, especially one that is as complex as larger land conservation deals can be. One point of reference, just as a case study, would be the Preserve, which is a almost 1,000 acre coastal forest in Essex, Old Saybrook, and Westbrook. And that was a deal that took years and years to put together, but it was one that combined local, state, and federal efforts, not only in terms of ownership interests, but also in terms of funding. And it's there, and it's there for everybody to enjoy. And I would say the same for Remington Woods. There is much to be optimistic for as long as everyone's willing to come to the table and look at these options and get the deal done. So that's it. I think you can go to the next slide. You'll have to remind me who's next. Sam.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much, Amy. I am going to give an overview of Remington Woods and where it is and the current state of the property and the urgency that is needed to protect this really unique urban forest. Next slide, please, Mary. So what you see here is an aerial shot of Remington Woods. This is a 422-acre property in Bridgeport and Stratford, about 75 acres in Stratford, the rest in Bridgeport. As you can see from this beautiful shot, it is really an enormous property. You can see in the top left-hand corner, the water. There you can also see I-95. Thank you, Mary, for hovering over here. At the bottom of this shot, the roadway there, I believe, is Broadbridge Avenue, just to orient folks to where this is. In the center-ish area is a 23-acre lake. And around it are all these neighborhoods that sort of, you know, cozy up next to it. Also nearby and somewhat adjacent to the woods are the new Harding High School, the 6-6 Magnet School. You know, so there it is. Very large. Oh, I want to go back to that one more. Thank you, Mary. Here in Bridgeport and Stratford, compare this to Beardsley Park. Beardsley Park is about 125 acres. This is 422. What's so unique about this is it's, you know, relatively untouched. I'll talk a little bit about its history and its use. But in our largest city in the state, we have this relatively untouched piece of forest land. Many people don't know it's here. Even people that live in Bridgeport. I've done a lot of tabling and talking to members of the community, and I'll show this map and say, did you know this is in Bridgeport? And lots of people don't know. So it's what we want to do is make sure that people know about this. To save this, people need to know about it and care about it. And one of the main reasons people don't know about it is because it's inaccessible to the public. It's largely fenced off because it is privately owned. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what's happened there in terms of its history and its past and its present, and hopefully, and more about its future. Next slide. This is a shot of that lake you just saw in the center of the aerial photo that was taken by, I believe, some Sierra Club members who had the opportunity to take a bus tour. The owner of the property at the time was DuPont, and they offered on occasion a chance to go inside and see inside the woods. And for those that have been inside, they say it's like stepping into a forest in Vermont. Just absolutely beautiful and a magical place. Next slide. So a little bit about the history. The Remington Arms Factory owned this land for a very long time. They had a big factory in Bridgeport where they made munitions that was opened there in the late 1800s. And from what I understand from the recorded history in 1906, they reserved this 422 acres away. It was away from the factory because the factory had had some kind of explosion. And so they wanted a place where they could test their munitions, and kept it undeveloped, but used it as a live ordnance field. And so in that lake, you saw the beautiful shot of and from the aerial shot, there were a lot of munitions either dumped there or shot in there, everything from small 3-inch bullets to, that's my arms, 3-foot long artillery shells. And so clearly it's not as, it's fenced off for a reason. It's not a safe place right now for people to be in. In 1993, DuPont took over ownership of the Remington Woods, and there's been a cleanup effort happening for many decades. In 2015, there was a proposal for a very large corporate office park, kind of like a suburban style office park, to go on the property that would have been many multiple buildings taking up parts of the property with a roadway running through, and Sierra Club members got involved to raise concerns, and that that development proposal did not go through, and DuPont continued to clean up the property. So that takes us to where we are right now. There have not been any development proposals that have been publicly announced, and the DuPont merged with the Dow Chemical Company last year, and so changed the name. So the owner now of the property is called Corteva, and Corteva continues the cleanup. They have been this year in 2020 plan to work to drain parts of the lake little by little, to partition them off, get in there, get the munitions out from the sediment, clean any toxins in the water. And they've done that with all the waterways and any contaminated soil on the property in the previous year. So this is what they anticipate to be the last year of this many years long cleanup. And they have estimated that they'll be done cleaning this up at the end of 2020. And so what happens to the property then is really the urgent concern, and why we're trying to make sure people know that it exists and are advocating for its protection. There are a lot of choices in front of the company, as Amy said. And so what we'd really like to see happen is they choose to protect this property in its entirety for the benefit of people in the community. And next slide, please, Mary. And before we move on to the community and Ashley and Joe, I just want to note the wildlife. Despite that this has been under a cleanup, it is an amazing wildlife refuge. On our website, saveremingtonwoods.org, there is a full list of all the species that were identified in a 2008 biological survey of the property. That biological survey is also linked on the website. But in 2008, when the survey was conducted, there were over 70 different species of birds, fish, herptiles, which is both reptiles and amphibians, as well as mammals. And since that survey, there's also been species that were not identified in 2008 observed in the woods, including bald eagle and bobcats. And if you go to the next slide, just a very cute picture of a bobcat cub. I had to put that in there. And next slide. I just wanted to end with this quote before I turn it over to Ashley to talk about equity, and Joe to talk about community access and potential stewardship as we move forward. But the founder of Sierra Club, John Muir, was the human benefits that Eric talked about, that we now have real scientific evidence for, was John Muir. Well, he didn't have the scientific evidence. He felt in his soul the wonder of being in nature. And so I like this quote expressing that: the clearest way into the universe is through a forest wilderness. And you know, I hope that we can protect this woods so that the community has access and people can experience that kind of soul fulfilling benefit of woods like Remington Woods. And so that's a little overview, and I will turn it to Ashley to talk about access to nature and equity.
Thank you. So one of the things that comes to mind listening to the earlier presenters is stewardship. How do we even create a steward in someone? And I want to start by saying we create a steward through nature connections, through having nature stories. Everyone should have a nature story. That moment where you connect to a place and connect to the outdoors. Rue Mapp, the founder of Outdoor Afro, leads her hikes and her events with connecting through sharing nature stories. You can hear her talk about that in her TED Talk, but she uses the statement as a way to bridge and to connect us to each other as we celebrate our shared connection with nature. The future conservation of Remington Woods could be a part of someone and so many's Bridgeport residents and regional neighbors' nature stories. It seems obvious to me the amazing potential in conserving Remington Woods for the community. The presenters give so many ideas of why it's crucial and important, but those benefits don't stop at Bridgeport city lines. The improved water quality, the supporting fish habitat, air quality, and recreation will be for the region and for Bridgeport residents. So historical zoning practices point to the or the larger impacts or burden that urban communities like Bridgeport have had to take on. So my research at Yale explores distributive justice and other forms of justice. Distributive justice research explores the burden, the unequal burden of industrial development and hazardous exposure to underserved communities. But the protection of Remington Woods will directly impact the quality of life for Bridgeport residents and the region overall. The distribution of resources within neighborhoods like Bridgeport has huge impacts on residents' health, obesity, cardiovascular issues, which in light of COVID are even more important. Investing into this forest will have impacts on community access to green space, health and physical and social environments. So if you don't mind, could you change the slide? I probably one more because the next statement I would like to tie to that one. So if studies show that a mere 20 minutes spent among trees could improve a child's memory, then what could hours of bird watching through seasons do for Bridgeport kids? And I think that's where the value lies. Like, what does this do for life and quality of life and potential to interact with those ecosystems that exist and could thrive in that woods? So this is about equity. It's about access to nature. It's about health. It's about communities connecting to nature and outdoors. It's about the future nature stories in Bridgeport. So I didn't have a ton to share, but I think just dreaming of the potential and the nature stories that can be created through having the Remington Woods thrive and accessible to its residents is huge. So yeah, for that alone, we develop stewards through connecting to nature. We can't imagine fencing people away from nature and then hoping that they fall in love with it. So thank you for including me on this.
Thank you, Ashley. Let's turn to Joe Gresco, who's been following this for so many years and such an amazing champion for the environment and Remington Woods. Go ahead, Joe.
Good afternoon, everybody. And again, thank you for letting me take a little bit of time here. Agree 100% with everything that everyone has said. So I just took a couple of notes here to kind of follow up on some of the things that we talked about. Some good news. We were able to get the city of Bridgeport to alter its 10-year conservation and development plan to get away from the idea of a corporate park at Remington Woods, and to even on the record say they were more interested in having an urban forest. So the city council approved that last year. So I was very happy that that happened. At the update meetings that Corteva has every 6 months, they give neighbors an idea and a briefing about how they've moved over the last 6 months as far as cleanup goes. And at the last one, as they were explaining everything they've done, I asked a question to Mr. Tilley, and saying basically, you know, you've done all this work, and they've done numerous design and replantings and reconstruction to just hand over the keys to someone who's going to come in and bulldoze everything. And he looked at me and said, that unfortunately had happened to DuPont Dow before in the past. So they're very cognizant of not just, you know, letting the reins go on this to and have all of their restoration work destroyed by someone that is going to potentially come in and to develop. So I guess the bottom line on that is they're very interested in some sort of preservation idea as we move forward. Thank you to Amy, who has been dealing with my pestering for years now to try to create some sort of land trust. We have tried to make ourselves attractive to the Aspetuck Land Trust and possible merging with them. The 4 towns we're grouped together now are Bridgeport, Stratford, Trumbull, and Monroe. And if that doesn't come through, then we have the option of just forming a regional land trust for ourselves to potentially make it more attractive to Corteva to take one of the avenues that Amy explained and potentially donate, potentially let's hope for donate. So other the things that we've worked on, I've been talking with the Bridgeport Regional Business Council and specifically the Bridgeport Chamber, because our efforts have percolated through the area here, through the city, and it's getting back to some people that are more interested in developing something there, and they're worried and they're concerned and yes, I would love to preserve this 100%, but we also have to potentially wrap our brains around maybe a parcel that's closest to, if you remember the map, the upper portion near where the Bridgeport transfer station and animal shelter is already. The chamber is interested in somehow being competitive with Shelton for a larger parcel to offer to a business that potentially could redevelop. But you know, I've been trying to make the logical point that you know, the idea of a corporate park and just what happened to GE going to Massachusetts. So I think that idea is come and gone. And I did a little research about what it would take to even provide utilities and a roadway to get back there is just very, very expensive. So I think if we act and keep doing what we're doing and talk to those who are going to be making decisions. Before this all happened a couple of months ago, Congressman Himes was ready to revisit the parcel, 400-acre parcel, and I've been bugging him to potentially assist with securing some federal funds to try to preserve this. And as Eric and Amy had said about the preserve out in Eastern Connecticut, when everyone comes together, good things happen. So I'm hoping that this happens at Remington Woods, and I will wrap it up there. And thank you.
Thank you so much for all you've been doing on this, and to all of you, because we have come together here to advocate for preservation of the woods. If you could advance the next slide. There's going to be a lot of different ways and strategies that we have to employ as each of us have discussed. But I do want to invite folks to some of the ways that the Sierra Club is trying to make sure that people know about the woods. And so I invite you, if you'd like to join us in protecting the woods. We're looking for volunteers. We think it's really important that people know it exists. And so getting out into the community when we can get out in the community and be together. And when we can't, doing as much as we can through social media and print media to let people know that Remington Woods is here and to advocate for its preservation. So if you'd like to volunteer, my information will be on the next slide. Please reach me. We also have a petition to asking for people to sign that they support the protection of Remington Woods. And anytime you see something about Remington Woods, please share the information with folks. We all have our own networks, and so let's get the word out and build a base of support for this to be preserved. There's a website about Remington Woods, as I mentioned before, that has the biological survey and lots of information, including the petition on it, as well as a Facebook page that I invite you to join. And let's go to the next slide. We had a couple of questions in the box. Thank you for those. And they are, I think we might have touched upon them, but if any of you would like to embellish your comments to directly answer the questions. One is, presuming you achieve conservation status, how do you establish funding for ongoing maintenance? Such a large property surely already needs invasive removal, new trails, etc. Would anyone like to? Go ahead, Eric.
So I would just add that there are an awful lot of things in terms of ongoing maintenance that can be done with support from volunteers. And so some of the costs that may seem a little bit daunting, if those were going to be, let's say, municipal employees or some other paid group that would be doing the work, may not be quite so dramatic in terms of cost. And there are obviously wonderful community groups in Bridgeport, like Groundwork Bridgeport, and others who might be able to fold this into things that are already being done. You can think about the various things that have to be done in terms of maintenance. A couple things mentioned there, like putting in new trails. That's something that my organization, Connecticut Forest and Park Association, with lots of wonderful volunteers, does all the time. It does take some funding to put things in and then maintain them. But I would say in terms of the benefits back to the community, it's almost always worth it, well worth it, in terms of what the return is on those types of relatively small investments. It's good to be thinking about what it takes to not just protect, but also maintain. But so I appreciate the question, but I would say it's something that can definitely be done.
And if I can just add to that, I would say that, land trusts all have and should have their stewardship reserves. And that's something that is worked out in advance with landowners as part of a land transaction. So certainly in that regard. And to Eric's point about volunteers, most of our land trusts are all volunteer, but even when it's municipally owned, oftentimes friends of groups are formed. They're nonprofits so that they can apply for grant funding that the municipality otherwise might not qualify for. And there are some funding sources to help with stewardship, right up to the federal government. The Natural Resources Conservation Service has funding sources for different types of stewardship efforts. And so to Eric's point exactly, I mean, this is something that's doable, and but also good to think about in advance.
Another question was about, has anyone approached the owner about the property? And I think, Joe, you touched on that a little bit, that there, are regular conversations with them. I don't know if you want to add anything more to that.
Yes, I directly asked them if they were interested in this, and the vibe I got was yes. And I could point to another instance here in Stratford. Corteva is working with Connecticut Audubon, and at Stratford Point, if you looked at a map of Connecticut, it's the part of Stratford that juts out even further than everything else into Long Island Sound. It was back in the day, it was a gun club, believe it or not, where people would go and shoot skeet, and Corteva came and cleaned up all of the lead shot, and let both the Connecticut Audubon and Sacred Heart University free reign on the property, and they had subsequently removed all invasives and planted natives and took down buildings, and we planted beach grass and the whole 9 yards for. We are in the final stages of dealing with the possibility of them, hopefully with an endowment, not wood. Giving the property to the Connecticut Audubon. So that to me shows that they're more than not interested in conserving and preserving the work that they've done. You don't have to be an environmentalist. I'm not going to do all this work and then have somebody come and dismantle everything I've just done. So the long answer is what I just said, but the short answer is yes, they've been approached, and I believe they're interested.
Wonderful, thank you. And the last question, more of a comment, but if anyone wants to reflect on this, Bridgeport's commercial real estate vacancy rate is 17.7%. Norwalk and Stamford are closer to 25. Likely development would take place there before a place like Remington Woods. That's something we've been talking about as well. I don't know if anyone would like to reflect on that. It was more of a comment than a question.
I could say that I say that all the time to our economic and development director. They're under pressure to bring businesses to the city, but they also realize the point that I made about the utility lines that would have to be put down, and the access to the property, and I think that the pendulum is moving more towards urban forest, and I also am in MetroCog's ear all the time about helping with funding potential for this when the time comes, and for planning purposes. They were very helpful in getting the city to alter its conservation and development plan. So I'm trying to rally all of the troops, as they say.
Yeah, I think Joe's absolutely right. And the only thing I would add is a lot of towns, as they think about their tax base that could come from corporate taxes, also think about the funding that comes from property taxes. And if you think about what, if you were able to protect Remington Woods and it became a place that people really wanted to live near, And if you saw property values also increase in a sense because people wanted to be located in that area, that is another way to support the local tax base and also provide all of those community benefits. So it's not just the corporate tax situation, it's looking across the board and all of the benefits weighed against that.
So I want to just thank you all for being here and sharing your time and your knowledge and coming together as we are from our various perspectives on Remington Woods. So thank you to all the panelists. Thank you so much to Mary Hogue, who's behind the scenes, taking care of the technical aspects here, and for all the work she's done here on the 50th anniversary of Earth Day to put on in a brand new way, given our social distancing. She changed everything at the last minute and still got it all done in such a beautiful way. So thank you, Mary. Next slide, just so folks have it. If you'd like to reach any of us, our information is here, and we can, take comments and questions and suggestions from you via email. So thank you and happy Earth Day.
Thank you.
Thank you, much appreciated.